Hello, beautiful community. Today we're talking about the Kremlin's evil plans around Trump 2024. And it's an important conversation because we want to admit realities about Russian interference in our democracies, but we also don't want to freak out about it and completely lose our sense of perspective. And all of that is made all the more significant by Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine, about which each of you knows so much really on a daily basis. My health is not amazing right this minute, so I may be going a bit slower and be going blank from moment to moment, but I think we'll get there, and I think we'll have a good conversation in about 10 minutes. Oh, and thank you for the extraordinary contributions to my myalgic encephalomyelitis fundraising Q&A. I'm enormously grateful for how well we did with that. That surpassed all of my expectations. We raised $6,500, which is absolutely tremendous, and I'm grateful not just for your contributions, but for your curiosity about why ME is a very significant social issue, completely independently of it being the case that I'm sick with it. So let's go to about 2016, when the Russians kind of backed Trump. So is this true? And if so, what difference did it make? And why did they back Trump? Well, in 2016, they didn't think Trump could win. So they weren't backing Trump as a potential president. They were backing Trump as a disrupting figure who would make life for Hillary more difficult and would make Hillary's presidency more toxic. They bought into the political establishment in the United States prejudice that Trump couldn't win. But the logic was, look, all governments are implicated, this is the 2014 story, implicated in the sanctions regime against Russia, the milder sanctions that were in place then. These countries are going to be victims of our interference, the Kremlin thought, and our interference is going to be about undermining their democracies, about creating conflict and toxicity. So this is not about the Russians having a horse in the race that they are loyal to. It's rather about the Russians trying to cause the biggest possible mess. And they did that via the social media campaigns, via the hacking and leaking. But on the whole, the American center and the center-left overestimated the significance of the Russian interference in a very, very dangerous way. So there are people who deny it's real. It's as real as anything. So forget about that being a debate. But the question is, what impact did it have? And this is actually a more important question than you might allow, because you might think, well, okay, they made a 1% difference versus a 2% difference. Well, who cares? They interfered, they made some kind of a difference, and there we go. But no, there's actually a really serious danger there. And the danger is what I call externalization of domestic pathologies. It is about us saying, you know, all these things that are wrong with our democracies, they are largely products of malign foreign interference. The Russians getting into our democracies and making a mess. And if only we get rid of that influence, our democracies will restabilize into a normal orbit. So this is an absolutely out of control crisis that is happening in our democracies. Our unbelievable incapacity to look at the domestic causes of various kinds of political deformations. Much the same is true here. We're in East Sussex on the coast. Much the same thing is true in Britain. In other words, there is an extraordinary incapacity that Remainers, I'm a Remainer, people like me, show when it comes to understanding where the 2016 Brexit vote came from, what social forces it was an expression of. And you get this extraordinary situation as a result where philosophy professors on Twitter think that Brexit is caused by a combination of, one, irrationality by voters, and two, malign foreign manipulation of Britain's democracy. And if you get rid of irrationality and malign interference, Brexit's a non-issue, it can't happen. And that is absolutely terrifying. It's terrifying because it means that people who think that they know what the sources of our problems are in fact people who are completely flying blind, people who are going to be completely unalert to that absolutely vital moment that's going to come in many democracies, whereby you have to judge, is this the time where we have to stand up because it's our last chance to preserve counter-majoritarian institutions, our last chance to preserve checks and balances and so on. So there's an extraordinary depoliticizing effect that this business of thinking, it's foreign interference plus irrationality has. When we fall for that, we actually become, as a phrase I used the other day on the main channel, psychological siblings of that depoliticized blob in the middle in Russia, right? And we don't want to do that. We don't want our democracies to be drifting away from us while we're in denial about where we are and where things are moving. Rant over, back to Russia and Trump. Now, having been shocked by Trump's election, having initially celebrated it, the Russians became enormously disappointed with him. And they felt that two things went wrong. One, they could kind of predict, and the other they felt they couldn't predict. The one they could predict is that American institutions kept Trump in check and to a good extent co-opted him. But then what also happened is that Trump, while being a communicator of genius, showed an unbelievable incapacity to form an elite around him and actually get things done, and actually in a significant way begin to break down America's democratic institutions. They thought he'd be able to do that more, but a combination of neurodiversity and extreme narcissism and some other factors made Trump completely inept at this. So he's the opposite of a kind of Viktor Orban, or Putin indeed, who would be able to come in and very slowly, in a disciplined way, begin to form alliances and begin to tilt the situation in the direction in which they'd like it to go. So they were very disappointed with Trump. What they think now, however, is that while Trump is probably still incapable of forming an elite around him, he is going to learn, and he looks willing about learning some lessons from his first term to get less co-opted by the institutional establishment, if you like, and to be able to attack it and toxicify it more efficaciously than he did the first time round. So I think he'll do better with that, but not quite as well as they might have originally hoped before they found out what Trump's like when he's in office. Now, they know that Trump isn't a fan of Zelensky and that Trump is not a fan of a Ukrainian victory. But they also realize that complex democratic bureaucracies are difficult to turn around, and they are aware that Trump's not going to be able to come in and sort of press a magic button. But they feel that Trump will be a very important post along the way to the Kremlin cultivating for itself an opportunity to have a frozen conflict, which is then followed by, as it were, a lifting of the clouds, so that the Kremlin can then have a second go at Kiev, or maybe even try to provoke a weakened NATO by challenging Article 5 in 2028, let's say. What's very important to understand here is that the legitimately real forces of democratic decline in the West are misunderstood and overestimated in the Kremlin. They don't understand how much the process of democratic decline in the West, while real, is also contingent, can be partially reversed, and takes very different forms in different countries. So what we are legitimately worried, and indeed we're going to talk about this a lot more, about connection with our democracies, the Kremlin sees in this sort of simplified ideological dogmatic way. So the Kremlin thinks that the rapid decline of Western democracies is inevitable and that it's going to be rapid too. That's on the whole a mistake. But that is the kind of dogma with which they're approaching the prospect of a 2024 Trump win. And this time they're more realistic and they think that it's a coin toss between Trump and Biden. And obviously they don't want Biden to win. They want Trump to win. But here's a very important follow-up. I'm not an American citizen. But if I were an American citizen, I would take very seriously the idea that you've got to approach Trump voters with dignity and recognize that you share a table of politics with them. And only that will allow the United States to move toward rescuing or reconsolidating some sense of a shared citizen belonging, without which no democracy can last for a very long time. And that's the crisis we're facing in the West, that we're relying on the strength of our institutions at the moment to protect our democracy from deleterious and toxic politicians and from the sort of seemingly inevitable divisiveness and polarization out there in society. All of that the Russians want to exploit, they want to mobilize. But the reason I'm speaking about it so much from our perspective is that we can't lose sight of the fact that what the Russians are trying to do is exaggerate and dramatize problems we already have, and problems which are nothing to do with Russia and which need to be understood and thought about in local terms. So I'm grateful for your time. We'll speak again probably tomorrow. Much love and talk soon.